Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name's Jonathan Warren, and I'm the Chief Executive of Localis, the place-focused think tank. And very warm welcome to our webinar and workshop, See Clearly Now, Transparency and Social Value, an event we put on in collaboration with Social Value UK. And huge thanks to Catherine Manning for devising this with me, and also to Maddie and Rosie for all their help in getting today up and running. So the intention of today's See Clearly Now is to bring together, first of all, a panel of top experts to help us open up a debate to consider how we might arrive at a definition of good when it comes to transparency. Primarily, what is being done to promote transparency in social value, to ask what practice, both good and bad, is out there, to illuminate what the next steps should be, to ask amongst ourselves what initiatives are already out there offering cross-sectoral thought leadership, space for sharing practice, as well as constructive criticism to help us build better practice, the guidance and resources and tools we'll need. Brief bit of context: the Green Paper for Transforming Public Procurement from last December sets out to promote value and transparency at the expense of red tape. As a principle of public procurement, transparency is to be enshrined in law alongside value for money, the public good, integrity, efficiency, fair treatment of suppliers, and non-discrimination. For our money, isolating transparency could be a precursor to better practice development across all forms of local public commissioning. There should perhaps be a shared understanding that perfecting this in the context of social value will be a journey rather than a one-time, one-off, big bang effort. So commissioners, suppliers and communities alike will probably have to reject any wild claims citing we've got perfection in here and get with the reform programme on the basis that everyone is or should be doing their best with what knowledge and resources they already have at hand. That said, it would be helpful to arrive at a common definition of the good when it comes to transparency in the context of creating social value. And since transparency is such an important part of the process, what's its impact? How can its best use deliver for the benefit of communities in their environments? How can it operationally support good local services and amenities, and for assisting local economies in recovery efforts? So that's kind of the preamble. The plan for today is we're going to open with our panel of top experts debating for the first 40 minutes or so, putting out some thoughts there as to what we can maybe derive from the transparency agenda. And for those who've got the ability to stay on for later, we're going to run some workshop groups to share thoughts and experience and understanding before circling back, and Catherine Manning will lead on that. So starting with our panel debate, we're very grateful for our top panel, which comprises Claire Dove, VCSE Crown Representative, Cabinet Office; Richard Kennedy, co-founder, Cornerstone Place. Great pleasure to have from the local practitioner side, Anne Lithgow, Social Audit Network Director and Principal VCSE Accord Implementation Manager at Greater Manchester Combined Authority. And finally, Catherine Manning, Operations Director at Social Value UK, who helped put together today's event. So very simple and straightforward. I'm going to invite each of our panelists in turn to lead off with their own thoughts and views about this before we put it out to Q&A amongst ourselves. And after that is complete, we'll then move on to our workshop sessions. But we've got to start somewhere. We might as well start at the very top. If I can invite Claire Dove from to unmute and get us going, please. Thank you.
Okay, that's the hardest bit finished, getting unmuted. Good morning, everybody. Really pleased to be with you today on this important subject of transparency. And we've seen over the last couple of years some of the worst failures in not being transparent and open. But what do we need to do to ensure that things are open? So my role as Crown Rep for the voluntary charity and social enterprise sector in government was to lead on social value in government. And that was about ensuring that every pound we spent, we maximised. It was about changing behaviours and attitudes. And we know the how we've always done it this way, so why should we change? And lastly, and most importantly, was to open opportunities to the VCSE sector and ensuring that government had a diverse range of suppliers. So what sort of, where did we move from? And if you remember, the social value bill came from SEUK. They were working with Chris White, were the architects of this. And this was to try and ensure that we got more, that social and environmental value was key, in society. And we can see it more than ever today. So it's been really taken the work that they did, because the bill in 2012 went through its different government track, it was weakened. And so it came out that we only had to acknowledge it. We didn't really have to, ensure it was implied in our procurement. And so that all changed. And the biggest change in government was an earthquake when Carillion went bust. And they didn't expect this. They held major government contracts. And it was the spiral into SMEs, apprenticeships, and all the people that were then impacted by this. And that's why the simple nuance for me was to be able to work with them and say, if we changed it from acknowledgement to report, and that signaled the flood chain, the floodgate opening. And so then we worked on that framework. And if we look at transparency, it's how we work with people, or do we just create something in the back room and there it is, there you can have it. And I think what we tried to do with the framework that we built on social value was to work with the sector, with SME, CBI. We worked with everybody. So everybody was part of creating this framework. And this framework was based on the Sustainable Development Goals. It was all if you look at PPN 0620, you will see behind the sort of main headlines what was happening. Jonathan just talked about the changes to procurement now and simplification. And obviously we're still, that still hasn't come out. The white paper on that will come out, I think most probably it'll be September now. And that was after post-Brexit. How do we simplify procurement? And making departments publish pipelines at least 18 months in advance, as opposed to, something comes out, 1 week. And what we've carefully done is that I have a national advisory group, and we've, and besides all of you being able to be part of the consultation, this group has sat around with the policy people in government to ensure that there is that openness and transparency to what we do. So we've, and the other part of this is about how do you co-create, does government or local authorities always know what's best for communities? Isn't it that they should be working with them to co-create something that works? And I know, for example, in the Ministry of Justice, our rehabilitation contracts that went out had to be brought back in because they just didn't work. And so what I'm saying about social value is that if you don't apply it at the start, you will pay for some of these services in other ways down the line. So you embedding social value will give the impetus and the impact that would be needed. So I'm going to stop there because I'm conscious that we want to really have a discussion, but it is about how are we integral to what happens? How is our voices heard? And through Localis and other agencies out there, how do we work together to make sure that there is that clarity. And then, you know, the final thing for us is we in government will have to publish what happens in relation to social value. And I'm adamant that we will do our social and environmental impact report about what's happened. And I'm obviously monitoring the level of spend with VCSEs, etc. So I'll leave it there, Jonathan. I'm sure there's lots of questions that will come from that. Thank you.
I should hope so too, Claire. Thank you so much for getting us off to such a strong flyer of a start. I'm going to invite Richard Kennedy to unmute and hear from you now. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Claire. And you know, really want to thank you for all the hard work that you're doing, you know, behind the scenes to, you know, should we say, you know, make the Social Value Act bite a bit more. You know, I think that's what we needed it to do. And actually, on the day the Social Value Act went live, Chris White was speaking at our Social Value UK members exchange at Blackburn House. So as a nice sort of rounding of all of the stakeholders. So yeah, I mean we've you know, I Richard Kennedy, I'm a co-founder of a social enterprise called Cornerstone Place, which develops property for those at risk of homelessness and does it in collaboration with charities. But I'm also chair of Social Value UK. And we'll hear from Catherine a bit later on that, and also co-chair of Social Value International, which is a sort of international membership body, should we say. And you know, transparency is something that has always been important. It's important in business. You know, it's important in your accounts. You know, when you disclose, you know, have you got any contingent liabilities and all that sort of stuff. But in social value, it is even more important. And you know, it's been central to you know, to our principles. It's principle 6 of our 7, soon to be 8 principles of social value. And it's about demonstrating the basis on which an analysis can be considered accurate and honest, and the way in which it's reported. And you know, I think social value is becoming more and more important in decision making. But I think the challenge, and I'll be very, very brief and I'll wrap up very shortly, is around, as Claire says, monitoring those outcomes. So social value is being used more and more as a lever for procurement, and people are winning contracts on the strength potentially of their social value bid. But then, you know, you flash forward 2 or 3 years when the work is complete and potentially the social value outcomes haven't been delivered as promised, and I'm not sure where the stick is in that at the moment. And I know Claire and Anne are working really hard to make those things become a bit more transparent and make sure that the social value that is sold in inverted commas in contracts is actually delivered through the process. And it's not just about winning business; it's about delivering that social value over the longer term to embed that value in the communities, you know, where these contracts are delivered. So a very, very brief comments from me, Jonathan. Very happy to go into more detail as we head into questions, and I'll hand over to the next. Well, back to you, Jonathan.
Many thanks, Richard. Straight over to Anne Lithgow, if you kindly unmute and talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you both, Richard and Claire, because actually I've been listening and sort of thinking I'm going to pick up something slightly different but linked to both of what you were saying. So firstly, ask a question about who's responsible for transparency. So a lot of the work that we've been doing, so I work in local government, obviously a lot of the work that we do around procurement and commissioning, it's almost like it feels like we take responsibility for social value and we use tools that track social value and through procurement. I have to admit, I think Richard's completely right that we haven't quite got, you know, the contract management and the accountability and the delivery quite right yet. We haven't got the brokerage mechanisms. But I used to work as a local government auditor, and for me, transparency, you know, has a specific definition, and transparency reporting around legal structures and governances and quality control and assurance and employment practice, accounting. So finance is only a little bit of transparency in that sort of world. Social value obviously is part of it too. I strongly feel there's a need for individual organisations to take some responsibility for accountability as well. So, and this obviously, as Claire was saying, is exactly where social enterprises, voluntary community sector organisations, co-ops, etc., come through so strongly because of their values. But you know, we need organisations in our supply chains who are taking responsibility for financial and social accounting. But maybe that's not even enough, because, you know, some of the tools and some of the reporting that goes on, I think there's gaming in there. I think there's also a little bit of spin in reports. So actually, you know, if we're truly going to have transparency on the finance side, you have financial audits. On the social value side, really we need social audit to mean that some of that reporting is true, it's reliable, it complies with the principles that Richard's talking about. And actually the voluntary and community social enterprise sector is leading the way in this. So Social Audit Network, I'm the director of, works with the social economy. We've got some brilliant examples of social enterprises who are reporting consistently, robustly and reliably on their social value. This whole social audit field is a sort of international one. It's really been picked up across, you know, we work very closely with India, South Korea, the US at the moment, increasingly as well. So I feel, and I would do, but I think we could really benefit from expanding the practice of social accounting and audit in this country to increase the transparency. Transparency gives accountability. So social value shouldn't just be a nice to have, and it also shouldn't just be something that happens at the tender decision stage. We really need it embedding in the whole system. So I guess this brings me back to, well, why and so what? So I work now at the Combined Authority in Greater Manchester. We have published a social value framework. We are encouraging all businesses in Greater Manchester and all procurements to be thinking about what are the priorities for change for the people of Greater Manchester, for their lives and for the planet. So really trying to get into a position where there is that transparency, there is that accountability for things that really make a difference for people. Thank you, Jonathan.
Many thanks indeed, Anne, for giving that practical local use of social value from Greater Manchester. Finally, Catherine Manning, thank you again for working with me to devise this. Please unmute as you have and take it away.
Great, thank you very much, Jonathan, and a big thank you to Claire, Richard and Anne as well. I've been furiously scribbling my own notes and learn something from all of you every single time I hear you speak. So Jonathan and I have been sort of talking around this topic for a little while, and as Richard's already outlined, from a Social Value UK and Social Value International and Social Value perspective, transparency really is central to our understanding of what social value is, and that principle sits within the social value principles. And for me, I've got a sort of experience in assurance and accreditation in the social value space. So linking in a bit to what Anne's been saying, I'll be touching on that in a second as well. But for me, the transparency piece is really central for social value practice in terms of our need for continuous learning, which is absolutely necessary within the social value movement, as there's still a real need for continuing development of practice. I'd say it's absolutely central to building trust, not just in social value, but in terms of public trust in the decisions that are being made more broadly, and it is central to accountability. But I would sort of say, perhaps building on what Anne said here as well, that I don't think that just having transparency immediately leads to accountability. I do think we need to have the practice and structures in place to ensure that accountability actually happens. So having that external assurance or verification or checks, but then also having those consequences where issues are found that Richard's been highlighting before. I suppose linking a bit to what Claire was highlighting at the beginning, I think there's been some really exciting and good and interesting updates if you're interested in social value and public procurement, and certainly in recently over the last 6 to 12 months, lots of good and important things sort of happening. So, the green paper that we referenced in relation to this event, so Transforming Public Sector Procurement, there's a big focus on value and on transparency there. There's been the launch of the construction playbook fairly recently, the update to the sourcing playbook just in May, and the associated consultancy playbook, and the updates to the green book, which has had a real softening towards social value. And sort of anecdotally, somebody counted that there's been value mentioned 476 times. So I think whilst there's certainly more to be done, there's also this really exciting space and good things that are kind of really exciting for taking the social value movement forwards and sort of utilising or really developing on the opportunities that come through the huge amount of public sector spend. I think what's 276 billion per year. That's my swing in the dark there. But and I would also highlight, this isn't just I think, as Anne said, it's not just a UK direction of travel. This is international too. And recently I've seen there's the European Commission has launched their own guide on buying social, so a guide to taking account of social considerations in public procurement. So yeah, the exciting updates going on beyond the UK too. But there are issues and risks, and I know some things that have happened have been mentioned already that have sort of shown that we need to have more of a review of what public sector procurement practice is doing. So at this particular point in time, we're in the context of big things that have been happening that have been undermining public trust throughout the COVID crisis. And I was just looking at a Transparency International report that's sort of showing, they're sort of stating that there's 3.5 to 4 billion pounds worth of COVID support contracts that award merit for further investigation. And it's these sorts of things that are undermining the public trust, whilst there's also this big drive and push towards great opportunities and greater transparency and greater chance of getting the best value for money from public spend. I just also finally build on the point that Richard had highlighted in terms of social value in public sector procurement itself. It's great that it's there, but I do think there's some big risks there. Value is subjective. There's a lot of professional judgment and assumption that's going on in the development of social value data, and there's still a lot of skill development that's needed in terms of social value practice. And I would also say that we could do with some more oversight of the different social value practice that's going on for us to be able to understand what's both good and what's bad. Now, in terms of the risks, I think those challenges need to be recognised in the practice, whilst we've got this drive towards more decisions being made based on social value weighting within tenders and contracts. And that's also driving people towards that desire to sort of prove value at the beginning to be able to win the business. But what we really need to ensure is that we've got the contract management practice in place, with people having the capacity and the capability to be able to check what's actually happening as that contract's being delivered. And there being the practice in place to be able to implement consequences where there are issues that arise. So yes, that's my 2 pence worth, Jonathan.
Thank you for giving it to us in old money, Catherine. Very good. Look, huge thanks to all our panelists, for setting the scene, giving their own personal views, experience, professional practice on what's at stake in this agenda. We got the chat open for people who want to throw questions in there. But I just put sort of lob an open one to the panelists. Really, any examples? Lots been spoken about, sort of undergirding policy as well as practice. On the first, are we satisfied with the current direction of what's being done to promote transparency in social value on the policy side, and on the basis that nothing communicates so readily or as well as actual proof or even sort of negative examples, as I know from doing a recent report around council commercial activity, what was there good or bad out there to illuminate maybe what the next steps in the direction towards using transparency in social value to deliver the best outcomes for people, places and communities? So policy and practice, any sort of thoughts out there from amongst our panelists or even from our webinar participants, if they care to use the chat button? Claire, is that
Jonathan,
finger, please?
just to come back in. Yeah. First of all, Catherine, it's 292 billion of public money, 49 billion of which is central government. And so with the new green paper, which will become obviously on the legislation, is that this now brings into focus all of that money, which is the bigger prize for us in the VCSE sector. And if we get, and as you know, in government, we put a 10% minimum. And I did speak I was on a stage with Andy Burnham, and I know they've got 20%, but it's a static 20%. And I feel that, what I was saying to him, I'd rather have not a static, but it depends on the contract and what you want to do. And so colleagues in the MOJ with those rehabilitation contracts that went so badly wrong for them, they're now going out, they're looking at 20% for rehabilitation. But it should be, I think we said about, looking at what it is that we want to do. But I want to bring this back to our sector too, because we also have a responsibility well, first of all, how do we procure from each other, which is something I've been banging on about since my days at SEUK. If we don't buy from each other, why do we expect other people to buy from us? We've got an interest in each other's good health, so that needs to happen. And also there's got to be an honesty and a transparency there also. I mean, my concern is that when you do things like this, it becomes flavor of the day, and there's more experts than you can shake a stick at, on social value at the moment. But I know at the start of the pandemic, and I had to slightly alter what I was doing to support getting the money out of the Treasury, the 350 million, to support the sector and frontline services. And I saw all these applications coming in, and a lot of them would say, we work with the Black community, we work with, they worked with everyone. And we knew that wasn't true, at the end of the day. And there was no Black people around the table. When they brought everyone round in OCS, CSY as it is now, there was me there as a Black woman. And so I wrote to the minister and I wrote to the director and saying, this is a disgrace. And so we started to look at that. And it takes me back to years ago when I was on Objective One and I was on the board looking at the submissions from the sector. And there was one university who was going to work with 500 Black SMEs. Now, I'm still driving around Liverpool City region looking for that industrial estate where they were, because they knew that wasn't true. And I had to at that time say, this is just a load of absolute baloney. This is not, and if I hadn't have been there, because it was a university, would it have gone through? And so it's those perceptions that we have. And then, so it is about the honesty, and you're right, how do we measure, how do we validate what people are saying is true? And that key thing, Catherine, is that how do we ensure that we train and educate our people? And in government, we've trained 4,000 of our procurement staff on social value. And I just ran a workshop in Liverpool a week last Monday with my team from London for the City Council, the Combined Authority, and Alder Hey Hospital Trust. So working with them on this, because the most important thing also is that you see, and I think you were saying this also, Catherine, is that what I was adamant on in government is that from the social value framework that we put out, that it then went into the green paper. So you will see the golden threads going through, and you will see all our outsourcing playbooks now will have social value in it, because if it's not in it, we pretend it's not there. But if it's in it, then we can hold people to account. So I'll just shut up there.
Many thanks, Claire. Anne, please.
I was just picking up from what Claire was saying. I think, you know, my particular role in the combined authority is a slightly precarious one. You know, it's a policy role, but it's working very strongly with the VCSE sector. I often think that policymakers, myself included, almost like make it too difficult to do. There's something about train tracks here that we need to be improving transparency and reporting and accountability and all those sorts of things. But we don't need to do that in a way that actually puts up further barriers, particularly for social enterprises and voluntary organisations. You know, that from the engagement that we're doing, actually it's almost like doing this can make it much more difficult for social enterprises to win the contract. So if we are sort of trying to set standards around transparency, we need to help the organisations, the SMEs, social enterprises, etc., we might want in our supply chains to be able to be more transparent themselves. So like I say, I think policy makers need to do more than just make policies. They actually need to look at the market and work with the market, engage with the market and help the market that they want.
Many thanks, Anne. Catherine.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. Well, first of all, thank you for the correction on the numbers there, Claire. I was a swing and a miss, wasn't I? But yeah, some really good points on this already. But I suppose coming back to your original question there about how are we satisfied with the direction from the policy side on transparency? And I suppose just on a positive note, to see it so front and centre talked about within the green paper, which I know it's set to become the white paper later in the year, so those changes haven't come in yet, but to see it so front and centre and this sort of desire or proposal to actually enshrine transparency amongst other things into law, so that's fantastic to be able to see that commitment really for that way for this to go, and for that to be so strongly linked into commitments towards social value and making decisions for the broader sense of value, social, environmental and economic, just not just on financial. But I would sort of highlight in there as well around, you know, when we're talking about social value and the transparency of the social value part, we've got to be looking at not just that some things have been measured, but actually where are those metrics coming from? How are we defining the data? How are we saying that those are the right things to be measured for us to then be saying, well, that's what shows that social value is actually being created or not created and therefore needs to be managed within a particular contractual situation. So I do think that there's more work that needs to be done around defining, well, what are we being transparent about in terms of the social value requirements of a particular a particular activity. Now, I think that links into the point that Claire had raised right at the beginning around, how are we actually achieving the social aims or the social outcomes that we're wanting from the different things, that the different goods, works and services that are being delivered through the public sector. And that needs to come from that understanding of what that is through engaging with communities directly, which feeds into social value, the first principle, actually involving stakeholders, and that we need to be defining what the need is directly with the communities who are experiencing the challenge and the needs themselves, and then being able to feed into what we're actually going to be delivering and how we define whether it's been a success or not.
Many thanks, Catherine. Richard, would you like to come in to respond to any of?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just pick up on a couple of points. Yeah, and I think there's different phases, right, of a contract, and I think there needs to be transparency in the what is it that the local authority is looking for, or whoever it is that's commissioning that piece of work. Be really clear about that, and I think picking up on what Catherine just said, it is not always apprenticeships. It's not always carbon dioxide reduction. It's not, for a particular community or a particular contract, hopefully the local authority is working with the local, voluntary sector. What is it that this area needs most? And those are the things that should be going in the sort of social value element. Then I think for the bidders, there needs to be, the people that are bidding for those contracts, transparency in how they've defined the social value that they're delivering. So, what methodology have they used? How are they going to measure that? How have they defined it? Is it just a sort of tick box exercise, or have they really sort of done a decent piece of work about how they're going to deliver those outcomes? And then during the contract, there's a kind of, coming back to what Anne was saying earlier, an audit or assurance of the social value that's been created or not created during that contract. So you've won a contract in a transparent way because you've got some outcomes that have been put in the contract because that's what the local community need. The bidders have then been successful because they've said, we're going to deliver X, Y, Z, and this is how we've how we're demonstrating that we've been transparent in how we do that. And then in the contract execution, actually showing that you do actually deliver on those social impact. I mean, and I'll take a very simple example of a contract, collecting bins. If you miss one, as someone who lives in a house, obviously, if they miss my bin collection, you bet your bottom dollar I'm going to be straight on the phone. Why haven't you picked up my bin? But do I know about the social value angle that's in that contract? And is anyone picking up the phone to say, you promised an apprenticeship, or you promised that you would, do this thing for the local community, and you haven't done it. And I think there just needs to be that element in the kind of follow through at the back end of the contract. So sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now, Jonathan.
You're very welcome to be on your soapbox, Richard. This is why we're here, Zoom Soapbox. Quick question. Jasmine Kane from the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council has asked twice. Could anyone care to answer this? She asks, is incorporating social value in procuring activities based on the value of the activity, or is it to be embedded in every procured activity regardless of cost? Anyone like to? Or shall we plead fifth? And come.
Maybe I think the answer is it's sort of there are different, there's the national rules around this, the Social Value Act, how that applies, but actually individual public sector organisations choose to go beyond the Social Value Act. So so my employer, the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, would apply social value to every single procurement, no matter of size, and also our grant giving activities and things like that, and how we apply it across some of our investment funds, and also our construction and things like construction projects and funding of large-scale investment. So actually, there's two answers. There's sort of the legislative answer, and then there's the how interested is the procurement organisation in actually maximising social value.
And many thanks for riding to the rescue there. A few further questions. Kim Lawrence from the Bell Group asks that, he says, we're a contractor in the construction industry. There's very little opportunity during the tender process to find out about the communities affected by the contract, and little space on a tender to discuss consultation and how we can co-create. Any thoughts on how this could be changed? Very quick thoughts from the panel. How do we give contractors greater space to engage or consult at that stage?
I think that, I mean, if you were going for a government contract at the moment, then you would see that there is those questions under the social value that you would work out. So you would, you would have the space to actually do that in there. And I think, as Richard said, we've got to get away from social value as means how many apprenticeships you're going to do, and also in some contracts that it's proportionate to the value of the contract also, because I've seen some over-ambitious government departments at the moment actually wanting for a very small contract really a large slab of social value in that, which would not be achievable. So it really is being proportionate, but you should be able to do that. And I think what we are looking at within the 18-month pipeline is that people can start to get together. One of the things I've also put together with government lawyers is to look at a consortium model. Many of us in the sector have been shafted in the past with going, with different fellows into a partnership, and it's been an unequal partnership. And we know very small contracts will be unfortunately will lead to not getting the sort of value that we actually want. So I think one of the things we also do with our strategic suppliers is that before the social value element, they have to sign up to a criteria and have to report on these on a yearly basis. And that is against modern slavery, it's against the ethnic and gender pay gap in their organizations. Many have done the gender pay gap, but now the ethnic pay gap. It's prompt payment, because I know that some local authorities, when you want to get paid in 30 days, then we'll take a percentage from your contract, which I think is totally unreasonable. So prompt payment, and then in our yearly indicators that we get from strategic suppliers is their spend with VCSEs and SMEs. And each year I am now putting in a range of questions that I will ask them to report on VCSEs. So the contracting authority has a lot of opportunities to absolutely set out their stall in what it is that they want to do and how they want to, move forward. And if it's in-house building, it's about, we know that people being included in the design of the housing, etc., gleans really great results because people feel, that treasured, that they've been part of that framework. Somebody asked in the chat about, can you go on the training? And I think somebody very usefully put in, no, it's only for procurement staff in local authorities and in government that we're actually working with. So, but I'm sure that there's lots going on with Social Value UK, with SE UK and others that can support the understanding of social value as you go forward. So yes, so that's me.
Many thanks, Claire. Up against Anne, very quickly, please.
So just a very quickly an idea that I think the duty on local government or the duty on governments in the Social Value Act is to engage with the market. Maybe it should be to co-create with the market. Just a thought.
I think that's what we're doing, especially with the we have a unit in MOJ, and we're looking at starting co-creation of contracts because things have gone badly wrong. And the whole point of this is that if you put something out there, you really want to make it work.
I'll just add a very quick point, probably touching on a couple of both of the questions that have just been asked. And one of the things we're really interested in at Social Value UK, and we think is really necessary for the movement as a whole, is more sharing about the different practice that's going on at this point in time. So be that, how are people applying a particular weighting within their procurements, or the second point around, well, how are people co-creating or engaging with their communities to know what's most important, and therefore where we direct the social value activity. But it also builds on that point to say that whilst there's this necessity or the need to be responding to that requirement within particular tenders, we'd be advocating for organisations to be understanding, well, what's going on with the stakeholders that you're affecting through your activities anyway, and you would therefore then be in a better position to be able to respond and say, well, this is from a place of confidence, say, well, these are the kinds of things that we do on a day-to-day basis, and these are the kinds of stakeholders that we're engaging with and affecting, and therefore we've got this better understanding of where we're coming from and match that to the requirements within the tender as well. And just on Claire's point, yes, there's training on different parts of social value and procurement that Social Value UK and others of our partners are running, so do reach out on that.
Many thanks, Catherine. Well, I think we've pretty much come to the end of the panel debate. There's a great question from Sharon Hobson. I think if we can keep a record of that, ask about how we get people to buy into the monitoring process during a contract term. Anyone's seen that on the chat for the panel who's got a 10, 15-second answer? Sharon asks, she's from Liverpool University's Hospitals Trust, led on a social value response to a council tender for a community service. Her question is, how can I, or who should she engage with the individual services and get them to buy into the monitoring process during a contract term? Obviously, Hospital Trust, key local economic and community anchor organisation. Any quick answers before we hand over? Claire? One
quick answer from me is that one of the things I've been saying to suppliers in government is that has your organisation got a social value strategy, and is it part of your procurement? Because what I'm finding is that they will do it for a contract for government or a contract for local authority, but they're not embracing it. Because if you really believe in social value, then it should be part and parcel of your organisation and the hospital trusts, which I know the NHS have just now got them to take the government framework and slot it into their procurement nationally. So I think you must have that integral before you start going out.
Many thanks, Claire. So look, we're going to call an end to the panel debate part of our proceedings. Huge gratitude to Claire and Richard and Catherine for getting the debate open so well, fielding questions and bring the debate amongst themselves. But from now on, I'm going to ask Catherine to talk us through how we're going to run the workshop sessions.